Good evening, everyone. Welcome to tonight's event. This is the 2024 British Academy Lecture Series being delivered in partnership with the Insights program here at Newcastle University. Before we begin, can I please ask that you keep your phones on silent? Actually, I'm going to do that now myself. Give you all a moment to do that. Just ignore these calls. Right. So we are not expecting a fire alarm tonight. So if the alarm sounds, lucky you, please follow the instructions of our stewards and make your way out of the building towards the car park. If you'd like to tweet about tonight's lecture, please use the hashtag InsightsNCL. Also, following the lecture tonight, there will be an opportunity to ask questions. So the British Academy is the UK's National Academy of Humanities and Social Sciences. It mobilises these disciplines to understand the world and shape a brighter future. The British Academy is an independent fellowship of world-leading scholars. It is a funding body for research and a forum for debate. As such, the lecture programme curated by the British Academy Fellowship aims to stimulate discussion and debate. The British Academy Lecture Series reflects the wonderfully broad breadth of our subjects and the academic perspectives within them. Now, on to our presenter for this evening. Professor Annelies Kusters is Professor in Sign Language and Intercultural Research at Heriot-Watt University in Edinburgh, where she has been since 2017. She has a very broad academic background, so she has a BA in philosophy and an MA in social and cultural anthropology from the University of Leuven, and both an MSc and a PhD in deaf studies from the University of Bristol. She has a passion for ethnographic research and has conducted fieldwork across the globe, including Suriname, Ghana, India, Brazil, Kenya, Italy, France, Denmark, and even here in the United Kingdom, so almost every continent. Professor Kusters is, in fact, the first deaf person to achieve full professor status in the field of deaf studies in the UK. Prior to her appointment, every professor of deaf studies in the UK was a hearing person. And personally, I think that this fact speaks both to Professor Kusters' achievements and trailblazing nature and also the systematic inequalities and ableism in society which her research seeks to dismantle. Speaking of her research, she has led a team of deaf scholars undertaking pioneering research project entitled Deaf Mobilities Across International Borders, Visualizing Intersectionality in Translanguaging, which was funded by the European Research Council. Having created more than 60 different academic publications and more than 3 films, she is widely recognized for her expertise in the study of language practices, language ideologies, transnationalism, mobilities, and sign language media. Professor Kusters will be presenting tonight in British Sign Language. For those of you in the audience who do not know British Sign Language, we will have interpreters to translate into spoken English. English captions will also be displayed on the screen. Please join me now in welcoming Professor Annelies Kusters.
Sign languages do you think the world has? You could put up 1 finger if you believe the correct answer is number 1, 2 fingers if you think the correct answer is number 2, 150 to 300, or 3 fingers up if you think it's 6,000 to 7,000. I'm seeing a lot of 2s and 3s. I can see more 2s than 3s. Okay. Actually, you're right. 2 is the right answer. Number 3 is the number of spoken languages in the world. Number 2 is the number of sign languages which have been identified or have been named already or researched. Before I go on with my presentation, I want to give you a little bit of fundamental information about sign languages. So it's important for you to know that sign language is not invented. It hasn't been made up. It has been developed naturally, just as spoken languages have. They're not made up. People who communicate with each other, and it's exactly the same with sign languages. There are some invented sign systems, such as Makaton, that you might have heard of, is not sign language. Sign language does not map to the spoken language of the country where it's from. So, for example, I'm Belgian. I use Flemish Sign Language when I grew up in Belgium. But Dutch Sign Language is completely different, even though the areas where these sign languages are used have the same spoken language of Dutch. Sign languages have different scales. I like to think of them that way. Most sign languages have a name at the country level. So, for example, here in the UK, we have British Sign Language. That's the name that's been given to it. America has American Sign Language. But there are sign languages on a smaller scale. For example, some villages have their own sign languages. My PhD research was based on a village in Ghana that had its own sign language, particular to that village. And that's because that village had many people who had the deaf gene had been passed on, so it had a high proportion of people born deaf. Sign languages also can have the global level. For example, American Sign Language. It is an American sign language, but it has come to be spread across the world. Many deaf schools established in South America, Africa, in the global south, use American Sign Language, which means that many people in the world do know American Sign Language. So, I've explained a little bit about the different sign languages, the attribution of names to these sign languages, and it's interesting to see, if we look back in time, quite a while back, people thought there was just one sign language. So you can see in the photograph here, or the illustration on the slide, that drawing shows Paris. At the end of the 19th century, there was a series of banquets that were held in Paris for deaf people, because there was a very well-established deaf school in Paris. And these banquets always had different presentations to talk about important issues linked to sign language or global issues. They talked often about how sign language was a universal communication method for deaf people. It was deaf people themselves presenting that because they believed at that time there was one sign language. It's interesting looking back at that now. These banquets had deaf people from a range of different countries, from France, from Germany, from America, from all over the world who attended. And they didn't all use the same sign languages. And people would come and they would observe other people using different sign languages, but they were still able to communicate. And that is because they were using something called international sign. And that's what I would like to talk to you about tonight. They believed that there was one sign language because they felt it was easy to communicate with each other. They did recognize that each other had their own sign languages, but they felt that there was a uniformity about the communication that allowed them to understand each other. So in some ways, we could say that sign language was thought of as universal. But we now, we donate sign languages with different names. We emphasize the difference between different sign languages rather than the similarities. So I mentioned these banquets and the communication that took place then using what we now call international sign. But at that time, that wasn't the name that was given to it. We don't know exactly what their signing was like. There are no filmed records of that time. We are talking about the 19th century. It was from 1834 that these banquets started. But looking back, it seems entirely possible that it was a form of international sign because of the mixture of attendees from different countries. So what is international sign? It's a style of signing where people from different countries who have different national sign languages come together and they communicate with each other using sign language. And that sign language that they use in these situations is called international sign. Now, what is international sign? How is it developed? It's a mixture of signs borrowed from different national sign languages. And also it relies on the fact that sign languages have similarities across their grammars. They're not all the same, but there are points of similarity across different sign languages that are brought into international sign, which means that deaf people can understand each other quite easily when meeting in these situations. So maybe you've heard this name, international sign, and maybe you've heard it's not a language, and that is because many people still ongoing debate whether it is actually a language or is it a system of communication. There's still some vague notion of what it actually is. It's difficult to define international sign. It's difficult to describe exactly what it is, because every time people use international sign, it looks different. It depends on the context. It depends on the people that are involved. So I'm going to try and explain a little bit tonight about international sign in this talk. So how am I going to explain this? I'm going to use film. In my research, films are very important. As Rory mentioned, I was trained in anthropology. I like to observe different cultures. And so in my research, I've been to many different places for fieldwork. I have filmed how people communicate with each other, how they mix socially, and I've captured all that, documented it on film. And not just myself, I have a filmmaking team who usually comes with me to the different locations where I'm doing research. I've made 6 films about international sign. 6 films, and each one of them links to a different aspect, a different type of event. So for example, one focused on sporting events, like the Deaf Olympics. It's other international deaf sporting events where people from different countries congregate together and use their different national sign languages and still communicate with each other through international sign. So the specific people that were in these events are captured in the film, and I've interviewed them as well. So I'm going to show you 3 clips from the films. And all 6 of the films are available, open access online if you're interested in watching further. So the first clip that I would like to show you is from my first film on international sign. Now you can see that on the screen. The film focuses on one very special place in Denmark where they have a camp for adult education for deaf people. And that location has courses on international sign for deaf people to attend. And deaf people fly in from all over the world, and they stay there for a period of time, several months usually, learning different aspects linked to sign language, deaf studies, media studies, different topics are available. And everything is taught through international sign. The teacher uses international sign, and the students, when they are socializing and mixing with each other, use international sign as well. This is a small clip from the film. So you can see this woman is from Korea, the woman on the left. The woman on the right is from Brazil. And this is the first evening when everyone's just arrived and they're just meeting each other and trying to figure out how to communicate with each other, trying to match each other's communication. So this was their welcome. So first you'll see, first I will explain what happened. There are subtitles on the clip. Okay. So you saw they were trying to communicate with each other, trying to understand each other in the clip. The woman from Korea is trying to use visual metaphors to talk about the weather in Korea. She's talking about a sword, and like feeling the weather is like swords pricking your face. But the woman from Brazil does not understand why she's talking about a sword and is confused. So then the Korean woman quickly changes strategy, pulls something else out of her repertoire, and she starts talking about the feeling on her face. She pulls her shirt up to indicate what you would do to protect yourself from that weather. So she's trying to visualize the concepts more. And that's a very important part of international sign. It's more visual. The explanations are more visual. They aren't using conventionalized signs and vague concepts. International sign is much more about clear visual communication. Now, I've got another clip I'd like to show you, again, about visual strategies used in communication. This is the same woman from Korea. And on the right, we've got a woman from the Czech Republic, and they're meeting for the first time and introducing themselves to each other. Now, there's been a little bit about a confusion about where the Czech woman is from. The Korean woman doesn't understand the sign for the Czech Republic, and so she's asking for clarification. So you saw there that they were trying to communicate. And at the very first, the Czech woman uses this sign for the Czech Republic, but the Korean woman doesn't understand it. And then she moves on to a different strategy and uses fingerspelling. But fingerspelling is not universal across the world. There are many different fingerspelling systems, one-handed, two-handed fingerspelling, a whole range, and the Korean woman is stuck with that. She doesn't understand the Czech woman's fingerspelling. So the Czech woman very quickly changes strategy, and she pulls something else out of her repertoire, and she starts explaining where the Czech Republic is positioned on the map of Europe. And it becomes very visual. She's drawing the map in her signing space in front of her. She's saying, do you know Germany? She places Germany as the big country in that region, and then she points to where the Czech Republic would be in relation to Germany. And she tries to draw in space the shape of the country. And so the Korean woman's understanding is starting to become a little bit closer. And the Czech woman says, later I will show you on the map. It will be clearer then. So you can see that there were different strategies that she was using to try and make the meaning more visual when the Korean woman did not understand the country name sign or the finger spelling. And that's an important element in international sign, how we communicate in international spaces. So we have ways of making things more visual. And it's reliant on this shared grammar that different sign languages have. Yes, they have similarities, so that's a useful strategy that can be brought to international sign. But the signs themselves, the lexicons, are completely different in these different national sign languages. So what happens if you've got a group of deaf people from different countries who've congregated, they've all got different national sign languages? How are they going to agree what signs to use or not? Let me show you a clip about this. Now, this clip is from the same group of students in Denmark, the Frontrunners group. I went 2 times to visit them at the start of the course when they were a new group that had just arrived, and also at the end of the course when people had been mixing with each other for several months and they knew each other at that point. So in this clip, you can see the change in signing. When I asked this lady what signs she used for different concepts, she would explain them to me, and now it's possible to compare the very first time I visited. On the left-hand side, that was at the start of the course, and then on the right-hand side, the same lady at the end of the course. And I asked different people to explain why they used specific signs.
Okay. So you can see from that clip there, people are explaining why they've used specific signs from the group. So one person used a Finnish sign or a Brazilian sign with the Portuguese mouthing, or signs from different contexts, Catalonian signs, all different signs that people have come together and brought from their various national sign languages and agreed upon in the group. And they explain the decisions why they decided to use certain signs. So that means that that particular group of students created their own system of international signing in that context. An international sign is sometimes dependent on the place, the people that are there, the backgrounds and the experiences and the languages that they bring, and the different power dynamics that are involved in those situations as well. So the term international sign, it can be useful in it can be used for two very different things. So it can be a process of calibrating between two people. So that can be languaging as a verb that we have on the left side of the slide here. And that is really a process, it's a free process. People can bring different resources from their national sign languages, from spoken languages, from finger spelling. They can write, they can show things on their phone. They can bring all different kinds of resources to enhance that communication process. It's a very free process of languaging and it's very fluid. So international sign is like that in some contexts. However, when it's a specific group of people that are using international sign over a course of time and a regular period, it becomes more conventionalized in a sense. And you see the same signs emerging again and again in that particular group of people as they're figuring out their dynamics. And that's another style of international sign that becomes more like a language as a noun. So it's interesting when we look at this. So we look at international sign as a term and it covers both of these different uses. And both of them can be used in the same context as well. There can be shifts. So for example, if we think about a big conference, such as the World Federation of the Deaf, WFD conference, that happens every 4 years. In that particular event, lots of people are coming together, thousands and thousands of people at a big congress. There are various presentations on different topics. For example, education, politics, history. And in that context, the presenters will be using international sign as one of the Congress languages, and it's more neutral than different national sign languages, and also it's more visual. So when people are mingling outside the conference at break time and things like that, they're discussing among themselves, they're doing calibrating. So they're calibrating to each other's language use. Maybe it's the first time they're learning international sign. So that's more like languaging as a process of trying to achieve communication. So as I've mentioned before, I've talked about the WFD, World Federation of the Deaf Conference, and in that particular conference they use international sign because people are coming from different countries together to the one space. They're trying to communicate with each other and they have chosen international sign rather than prioritizing one country's national sign language over another. So international sign, or people believe international sign, is a more neutral language choice for that environment. They're not picking one specific national sign language to be used. And in addition to that, people believe that international sign is easier to understand. That's the common belief because people are trying to be more visual with their sign language use. And it's more transparent as well. But there are some caveats to that. Is it actually more transparent? That's an important question to ask because international sign over the course of time has changed and it has become quicker, the pace has increased, and it's become more like a language in itself. So I'm going to show you another clip here. This was from my 5th film in relation to international sign. And this one looks at the conference setting in particular, the World Federation of the Deaf Conference. And there are 2 people talking about their experiences. They are both international sign language interpreters. Both of them have been working over a period of time in international sign contexts, and they're going to talk about how IS, international sign, has changed over time. Okay, so as you've seen in that clip, international sign has changed a lot over time. More people are using it. It's been used in different contexts. So international sign itself has undergone some changes, and it's become more like a language in itself. More like national sign languages from different countries that have developed over time. International sign has developed in the same way. So what does this mean? Some people feel a little bit stuck because international sign has become faster, it's become more established, the signs have become more established in themselves. So people feel that it's more difficult to acquire and to learn and understand, whereas before, international sign was traditionally slower and the pace has changed along with some other things over time. So in this clip, I want to show you, this is from the same film as I spoke about before. This is a person from Kenya, and they're explaining that they've come to a conference, but they're encountering some difficulties with international sign. And that's because in Africa, more people use American Sign Language, ASL, in an international context. That's because a lot of different countries have their own sign languages, obviously, but at the conference in Africa, when lots of people come together, they'll tend to use more ASL, American Sign Language, in those contexts, which is different from this particular congress here for WFD. So I'll show you this film as well.
So you can see previously, people thought international sign was not something that could be learned because it was more visual, it was slow, it was acquired through mingling with other people. But now, international sign has changed. It's become faster, it's become more clearly defined and delineated, and people feel that they have to study and learn it. But where are the opportunities to do so? There are very few. You know, each individual country typically has classes teaching its own national sign language, but it's very rare to find a formal opportunity to learn IS. So, how do people become fluent in international sign? Usually in the past it's been through travel. People who've travelled a lot, going to lots of different conferences, sporting events, maybe meeting people when travelling, backpacking on tourist experiences, meeting different people from different countries, learning and acquiring signs from these different countries, and through that becoming fluent in the process of calibration and learning international sign. It was not something that people sat in a classroom and studied, but now more and more people are requesting to be taught IS. So now I've got a clip from an IS sign class. And this class was part of a conference in Brazil. It's a sign language conference, And there were many people attending from overseas coming to Brazil, as well as people from many parts of Brazil, different parts of Brazil. And before the conference, they had 3 or 4 hour teaching opportunity of international sign, because many of the Brazilian attendees did not understand it and they wanted to learn. So they set up this opportunity to teach attendees a little bit of IS before the conference started. And just to let you know, there are subtitles. And you'll see this word coming up, Libras. This is the name of Brazilian Sign Language, Libras. So this clip is talking about 2 very different ways of learning IS. You can see this man on the right. He's learned through travel. He's acquired it through meeting other people and mingling with them. But now he has become a teacher of the IS lexicon But as I explained before, the lexicon is often connected, relevant to a very specific group, like that group I mentioned in Denmark, the Frontrunners group, who agreed what conventional signs they would use in their group lexicon for that context. So when you think about this gentleman teaching conventionalist IS, it may well be that it's very difficult to teach IS signs in that way because of the variety of the language, because of the flexibility in its approach to communication, and because, as I said, IS signs are often specific to context. So now I want to show you a little bit about what's happening now with international sign. There's a great deal more flexibility, yes, but there's also more language-like elements appearing in IS. So we're starting to see that. So I'd like to go back before we talked about the banquets in Paris, the Parisian banquets from hundreds of years ago, when there would be groups of people getting together, dining and watching presentations. And at that time, compared to now, it's very different. I mean, yes, people travel, they meet international deaf people from different countries, and then when they had finished in Paris at the banquets, they would go back to their own countries and they would use their national sign languages. Now, international sign is everywhere. You see it online, you can see it every day, you can see it on Facebook, Instagram. International sign is ever present. You don't have to travel to see it being used anymore. People can communicate remotely using video conferencing. They can send video messages on WhatsApp. So you can see international sign everywhere, and it is increasingly influencing national sign languages. So now I've got two clips from X, previously Twitter, from a few months ago. And it was from Sign Language Celebration Week. And it was here in the UK. And there were some videos that were created complaining about the influence of international sign on BSL here. So you can see this concept of the language BSL police protecting BSL from the influence of international sign. Now, this is happening. It's a hot topic all over the world, in India, in America, globally. Everybody's having the same conversation. How do we protect our national sign language from the influence of IS? So, last thing to wrap up. I started with asking you a question, whether you thought sign language was universal. But I wonder now if IS, with its continuing growing influence on the sign languages of the world, whether we are looking at the emergence of, in fact, a universal sign language. Thank you very much for watching.